Youth, new African, who black to them, ain't no accident. From the masses of the masochists beneath the rock where it's challenging. The chant them from the graves to the mattress back, flipping back, porch bombing, televised subscription. 999 addiction, prescription and victim to witness, witnessing indifference, shifting the state of my conscience, staying away from the nonsense.
Landed in Palestine.
99 addiction, prescription and victim to witness, witnessing indifference, shifting the state of my conscience.
Okay, are we ready? Let's do this.
Yes. Peace, y'all. How you doing?
Peace.
Greetings.
Is this thing live? Is this thing on? I don't know if y'all have ever seen T.S. Madison, but I need to get I need an introduction like she does. Peace, y'all. Peace, Africans. Happy Labor Day. Today is a day to celebrate our labor and to also think about what labor means in 2024, especially in relation to the things we're going to be talking about today. I am Musa, one of the editors here at Hood Communists, and I actually am going to pass it over to the co-editors and let them introduce themselves a little bit, tell about themselves, And then we're gonna get started on commemorating this fifth anniversary of Hood Communist. Brum, 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 brum. So let's start with you, Anya. How you feeling?
I am feeling very well, very happy to be here. It was actually my car troubles that postponed the previous live. I brought a brand new car, and then the check engine light went on like 2 days later when I was like 2 hours away from home, attending the African People's Socialist Party rally that they were throwing for those three folks that are being persecuted by the US government for anti-imperialism. But yeah, that was rough, but it's all resolved. We're here. We made it. Happy to be here. And I can pass it to Erica.
Peace. I'm Erica. I am a member of Black Alliance for Peace. I am also a member of Eugene People's Progress Party and founder of Liberation Through Reading. There's a lot of things going on. But I am, sad that Onye's car had some trouble, but also was like, oosh, because I was doing a lot on that Saturday. We had Curve Fest for political prisoners in Baltimore, and I would have had to Zoom. Well, I did Zoom home right after to make it for the live. But yeah, Salifu, how have you been?
Greetings, everybody. I am good. Back in the belly of the beast after having spent some time back home in Africa in Burkina Faso, and having some really incredible and eye-opening experiences. So every day that I've been back, I just been trying to like slowly adjust to life back in the US. And man, I will say leaving for 8 months and coming back. I feel like so much socially and economically has like crumbled very quickly here. And I don't know if it feels that same way to people that have just been here for the past few months, but I came back and I'm like, oh, so yeah, the social relations are like completely torn from the floor up. Okay, I see. But I'm excited about our celebration today, our conversation today, and I'm ready to get into it.
Period. Per. Love that. Always great to see that yellow and orange background on my Zoom screen. Um,
Icon.
iconic for sure. And yeah, I can imagine this is a very jarring time to leave and then come back. I mean, any time to leave the US and come back is jarring, but especially given what's going on right now. Um, so before we dive into really talking about and reflecting on 5 years of Hood Communists, which is it's in and of itself an accomplishment to run a revolutionary blog and publication like this for 5 years. Um, I wanted to just ask if we could check in and see what folks' summer has looked like. September is here. Like I said, Labor Day is upon us, so we're not supposed to wear white or something like that. Uh, but I feel like all four of our summers have been jam packed and then some, jam and jelly. So what does your summer look like? Maybe you could start, Erica, and just tell me like, what'd you do over the summer?
Yeah, I'm sure we're gonna get into like the start of Hood Communists and all of that. But one of the things that we were intentional about was that this would be a blog ran by organizers. And as we've gotten busier since the start, I think we've run into what that actually means to run a blog as active organizers and in most cases in leadership positions. So yeah, I've been pretty busy. I've gotten a chance to go to delegations. Bad Baltimore has been consistently busy with not just the town halls, but we just completed summer school. Like I said, we just finished Curve Fest. I got a chance to go to Nicaragua again. Always loved that. Been in Atlanta. Have seen you, Musa, a few times, I think twice already. I've been in New York. So it's been a lot of moving back and forth and helping building up BAP and then also with the blog and still working. So we've been pulled in a lot of directions. Here we are, recentering.
And what about you, Salifu? Tap in. What's your summer been like? You're on mute.
Sorry, I came back from Burkina Faso in May, and ever since then, I kind of had to hit the ground running for like a lot of work related stuff. So, like studying the past tests, and then I moved. I'm a public school teacher. I teach U.S. history, so like moved to a high school this year, teaching a new content area, and we're just trying to find ways to like subvert the system, man, and like not feed these kids the worst possible version of state propaganda that I can. Like always, I feel like I'm always just like looking at the curriculum, trying to figure out what I'm absolutely not teaching, what I need to reframe, what like trying to figure out what like tools and materials and resources that I have to help them like really understand this stuff. Is like, yeah, South Carolina State curriculum is very yeah, it's very interesting in the way it talks about the Africans and the indigenous. So that's kind of what I've been really focused on is my students. They're a big part of the reason why I'm back. So they take up a lot of my time, just being honest with you.
Yeah, I love that. And the love that you have for your students radiates. I think we can all see it. I ain't never been in a classroom with you, but I know you're an amazing teacher. Speaking of amazing dope teachers, we got the Onye Sanwoo herself over here. How are you, Onye? What's your summer look like?
Um, I was consumed with Cuba Solidarity organizing, specifically the organizing of the 52nd contingent of the Vencemos Brigade. It was really like the planning of it started in January of this year, but the actual trip happened in July with like a flurry of activity in May and June, and then deep recovery in August because we brought 103 people to Cuba, y'all. We went to the eastern part of the island, hung out in Guantanamo province, Santiago province, Holguin, and basically learned about the Cuban Revolution, acted in direct action and solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, brought some contradictions from the US to Cuba that we struggled through as a collective. And it was generally really intense, really transformative experience, as the VB always is.
Nice, period. Yeah, and I know every time you take a trip of people from the US to Cuba, there's a lot of contradictions that come up, to put it nicely. Um, on my part, I've been here tapped in with BAP ATL all summer. In June, we did a pretty intensive cultural work series. We taught all kinds of art skills and classes to folks, and then had a culminating art show to show off all the work we created in community in July. And then, of course, Black August is like every day something different to do. So booked, busy, all the things. Uh, and yeah, I think also I feel like I started off the year going to Cuba with Erica and sister Erica and Onye, actually, now that I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of like started on like an upward trend from the beginning of the year, really, for
Yeah.
sure.
Whole different year. I can't believe this was the same years.
I know, I know.
Yeah, that was literally a few like, the beginning of the year, but it feels like 5 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I appreciate y'all tapping in on the summer. Summer, for those listening, if you want to be an organizer, your summers are never your own. Summers just somehow are always just the busiest time in a good way, I think, usually. So, um, with that, we're here because it is the 5th anniversary of Hood, Mother effing Communists. And let's do some snaps and some claps for that real quick. Let me see all y'all's hands. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. In the chat, I'm gonna be monitoring the chat. So, if y'all have any questions or comments, just drop them there and I'll find them. But really just to get started and to get into it, I'm wondering if one of y'all, it was kind of mentioned earlier by Erica, so maybe you can start and then pass it to whoever. Um, and since I'm the newest editor here at Hood Communist, I really want to hear from the three of you who've been here longer. What is Hood Communist and why did you start it?
Yeah, Hood Communist is an African revolutionary blog. The intent of starting it, well, let me just say, I think the original editors at the time were all admirers of the analysis that we were producing online. That was the way that we knew each other. We were all like Facebook friends, essentially. And it was the overwhelming whiteness in left media spaces that did not talk about Africa, did not censor Africa, did not talk about Pan-Africanism, and did not even talk about African organizing and the importance of it. So we all decided that this was something that was necessary, and it was launched in 2019. And let me just say, the writing then and now, significantly better, I must say, I would say on my end. But also, I think the way that people have gravitated to hood communists shows that, it was a gap that we did indeed fill. And I think through the years, it has sharpened each of us because we have been tested. Onye and I, the original editors, but there has been a plethora of editors along the way in this 5 years. But I think Salifu and Ajamu Umi have been the longest and most consistent that we've had thus far. I think Salifu, you've been with us 3 years, maybe four. I think 4 years now. So yeah, so we're still going. You're like almost 2 years, Musa, with us. So I think that it's good. You can see the growth. I always encourage people to go back, especially in the beginning. It's a little rough there, but to just see the growth of not only our writing, but what we're saying and how we're trying to, because it also is a product of the intentionality behind we all organize, and we want to make sure that this is just another extension of our organizing work. It's not an add-on to, but it is a reflection of. And then we also, with our principles of unity, but as organizers as well, know that, our writing, at least there's a area of accountability. Like there's some shit that we just will not say because we have to answer for that because we are tied to organizations. So, there's no individualism replicated in that space. And I think that we've seen the way that it's been able to grow because of certain, not even political tendencies, but a particular discipline that we've held on to, even through the contradictions and the changes. And we're still here 5 years later.
Yeah. One, what about you? Looking back, from the time y'all started till now, what are some of the standout things related to like the start of Hood Communist to where we are today?
Definitely deeply resonate with everything Erica shared, especially the impact of all of the editors being active members of revolutionary organizations and how that creates a sense of like discipline and accountability that has truly shaped how the blog has developed. I think that it wouldn't have kept going for 5 years with all the stuff we have going on without the discipline that we get in our political homes, that we develop in our political homes. I also am really proud of the fact that it is a space where we have published like certainly like well-known revolutionary thinkers, but we've also published like people who are on the front lines of political movements who do not have academic or like, professional writer backgrounds, but are still speaking like raising ideas, raising points of struggle, sharing experiences and strategies. Like that is what our platform has always been about. We're like truly like the voice of like young revolutionary Pan-Africanists, including like queer and trans revolutionary Pan-Africanists and revolutionary Pan-African women who are on the ground, who are on the front lines, who are like building the movements that we are part of. And I have always really like that's maybe like the aspect of the blog that I'm most proud of, that we're not like removed from the masses or from the movement. We are of the masses and of the movement and accountable to it. So yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people's first place they've ever published something has been Hood Communists, like people's first piece of writing they've ever shared with the world. And that's really special and important to like grow and develop people over time too. Salifu, what about you? I know you might not be one of the founding editors, but like Erica said, you've been here for about 4 years. So how are you feeling about it?
Oh man, I feel like I feel like a lot of the person that I am, I have to give to Hood Communities because I literally remember where I was and like who I was at the moment that Erica extended the invitation for me to join the blog. And then I got on the call with everybody and like had to answer all these questions about what I believed in and like what I represented. And there was two things that I remember really motivating me around that time. It had to be like November, December of 2020, I want to say. And there was this one interview that Dr. CBS had done where she was talking about how like we had to get our international analysis up. I don't know if y'all know what I'm talking about, but there was like a little clip of it that was like going around on Instagram and stuff like that. She was like, we got to get our international analysis up. And then this was also a time where I had been watching the APRP New Mexico YouTube channel, and they were doing the like one-on-one series, like what is revolution, what is capitalism, like what is imperialism, like that, this kind of thing. And I was just learning a lot really fast. Like I was like literally sitting at my computer every day at this point, like with a notebook, writing stuff down. Like I was in class, like I was just learning so much stuff that I was kind of being exposed to for like the first and the second time. And I remember Dr. CBS's words about getting our international analysis up being like a really defining moment for me. So when Erica gave me the invitation to join the blog, I started to feel a responsibility to like know what the fuck I was talking about. Like I remember very clearly feeling like, okay, I'm gonna be an editor on this thing, and like I'm new to a lot of this stuff, but like if I just read and study and ask questions, like I'll be good. I'll be good. And so I really tried to commit every week to in that process when we started putting stuff up. Like I was like, I gotta read everything because I gotta know what it's about. And I need to be able to answer questions if people ask me why we put this up. And so I feel like in the process of doing that, I felt my brain and grow a lot in my ability to like process information and remember things and make connections, like make historical and like contemporary connections. Like I just felt such a big like growth in myself. And then also, I feel like those early days of the blog were really turbulent because we had a lot of haters. I'm just gonna be very like like blunt about this. It's like we not even just have. There's a lot of people that right now will probably try to run me off the road if they saw me driving because that's how pressed they are about hood communists. But at that time, I would say I was probably a much more conflict avoidant person. Like I really didn't want to ever really have to deal with conflict if I didn't have to. And being a hood communist really taught me like you cannot run from this. Like you have to walk up on everything and just deal with it. And like some people are gonna be mad about it, some people might not like it, some people may agree, some people may disagree, but you gotta struggle. And I feel like that's something that I really got from being a part of hood communist. So now when things come up, I'm just like, all right, so like when are we gonna sit down and talk about it? Like you know what I mean? I had to learn these things in hood communist though. So I'm very grateful for the blog.
Yeah, I love to hear that. There's a discipline that comes with it, that comes with not only writing, but editing other people's work too. Like, someone submits an essay to you or an article and you're the one that has to go over it, that's a level of responsibility right there. And talking about that responsibility, since we've all named that like this is, connected to organizing and we're not just writing for the sake of writing or publishing random stuff for no reason. I'm wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about like how y'all see the role of hood communists in relation to the struggles that we're all involved in. Like what's the role, the objective that y'all want the blog to play? And honestly, any of y'all can hop in first on this one.
I really think a lot about the battle of ideas that Fidel Castro talked about. The necessity to like none of us know, but none of our organizations have yet achieved the objective of revolution, which means that we have a lot to learn, a lot of experimentation to do, a lot of analysis to do, a lot of like struggling to do. And oftentimes, especially in Western countries, particularly in Western countries, that that necessity of like a very high level of discipline and analysis and struggle is instead replaced with like infighting and pettiness and like a deep toxicity. And so I really feel like with our points of unity, with our accountability to revolutionary organizations and movements, that our platform has always been about raising that struggle, identifying those contradictions, like putting forward new analysis to understand like what is happening in the world now for people to learn from, to iterate upon, to disagree with. Like I love when we post like a piece making one argument and then someone comes back with like a principled response, like breaking down what that's not true or they don't agree. And there's just like a back and forth, like a battle of ideas. This is the phase of the struggle that we're in, like the phase of mass consciousness raising, the phase of ideological development. It's like desperately needed that we do this work. And that is what I understand the role of a communist to be.
Erica, Salifu, anything I want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much more to that. I think we've all kind of been clear about that's essentially what the role is. Also, to bring people into organizations, understanding clearly that we cannot win this struggle without it being an organized struggle. We're against organized enemies. Um, And to Salifu's point about the haters, we caught a hell of a lot of slack for that, right? Like just to tell people to join an organization. I mean, yeah, they probably would run us off the road today, but um no, but it is a battle of ideas. And one of those ideas is why it's important to join an organization. I think through the blog, we've been able to make that case. Especially if you look at how we have sharpened our analysis through the years. Like you can Salifu was talking about how he joined, but the reason why I extended the offer is because I didn't know Salifu was sharp like that. I know Salifu I know Salifu for forever. We never talked politics, really, ever. And then he wrote this bomb piece about the Democratic Party in the 2020 election, and we published it in Her Communists. And when we came around to, what are we looking for in an editor? It is that somebody who is coming from a place of, or even as an audience member, right? Somebody who is coming from a place of wanting to know more and wanting to research and search for themselves. And then Salifu joined the organization and has been off and running since. And the person that he was then and the person that he is now. And I think that we can accredit that to the blog, but to the point of what we want to take away is that people are able to have an entryway, even if it is as a reader, and expand on that and find their footing within this movement, because there is a place for everybody. And I hope that that's expressed in the blog. And I think that we've done a lot of effort to make sure that that's expressed in the way that we publish and who we publish and the amount of things that we publish. I think in that way, we're very intentional about a particular audience and why we want people or African youth to be engaged in this movement.
Yeah, and something that I really have always appreciated about Hood Communist too is that it's not just one kind of writing. It's not just essays or just articles or reports from different organizations. There's poetry, there's creative writing, there's prose. Some people are publishing like essays they wrote for their class that they're republishing on Hood Communists. Sometimes we get submissions from people who publish things on like grassroots thinking from CMB or other spaces, Black Agenda Report, and they're like, can we publish this on Hood Communist? Or vice versa. Some of our stuff gets published elsewhere. And so I like that it's never been just closed off to one kind of writing, because we've also published some really dope poetry on the blog. Poets like Darius, for example, Darius Simpson, super incredible, super dope poet. Always telling me to push my pen every time I read one of his poems. And one of my favorite pieces of all time, honestly, Salifu, I think I tell you this like every 6 months, is the Saweetie Mill McDonald's
The
article.
best article on the blog. Like I use that in PE.
Yes, yes. You break down capitalism and exploitation and all these things through the Saweetie rapper
You couldn't
little.
tell me I wasn't Kwame Nkrumah when I wrote that.
Right? Y'all had you had
The
the graphics and
diagram,
everything.
the
Yeah.
diagram. Yeah, but I mean, that's what I mean, though. The fact that we were able to publish something like that, I don't think there's a lot of other places that would have even considered something like that. And so I want to ask too, maybe Onye and Erica, there's also this idea of like self-determination and us being able to have complete control editorially and politically of what we want to talk about, not talk about. So I just wonder if y'all could speak a little bit to that kind of self-determination and autonomy aspect of it.
I could start. I think the idea behind having a principles of unity, I think really is a guide for what we want to publish and how we want to publish it, what we will not publish. And that came out of a few struggles. I think that even the last one were like no dear white people pieces. It was because it was like that was enough. That was enough submissions of that. Like we're not trying to talk to white people. We're trying to talk to each other. We're trying to agitate each other and one another. Like we can't keep talking to white people. So we were really intentional about adding that as the principles of unity. But to that point, I think that that helps guide. Like we don't really say, like even Onye is especially lax with this, right? Like whatever, and not too much editing. Where I think there's a way to hone people in on their craft, like give advice. Hey, maybe say this instead of that, instead of like editorializing their shit or like completely. And we try not to do that. I mean, we do it to each other. but but to others, not as much. And I think we get genuine articles and we do give good feedback and people do struggle with us until they get it right. And I think that's good because we do kind of craft writers in our own way and people have been submitting in that way. But I do think it's really the principles of unity for us is really important, especially because it distinguishes us as a blog or independent media because you don't really find that. And surely, like, there's like guidelines that publications agree to and things like that. But our principles of unity is so specific and it really speaks to our organizational practices and how serious we are about that. And I think it's reflected in what we allow as submissions and to be published and what we absolutely are like, no, not at all.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Also, I'm definitely someone who like likes the more experimental stuff, like the different formats and the different kinds of writing and the more out there ideas. And I feel like we balance each other in a really great way. But also, this question made me think about shortly after when we went to the international convening of publications of the left in Havana, Cuba, in February of this year. We were like sitting at this conference with a number of revolutionary Palestinian students, organizations, and like one of the clear asks coming out of that conference, coming from the Palestinians, was to republish the statement that the Palestinian resistance put out about the Al-Aqsa flood. And we had a conversation about it because at the same time we had been discussing, looking at fiscal sponsors, finding ways to bring in more resources for the blog to be able to do more things, right? And to be able to build more capacity. And we had to have a conversation, like, we want to publish this. It needs to be seen. We want our audience to engage with this, to counter the propaganda, the Zionist propaganda that is targeting the Palestinian resistance movement. But also, if we put this up and say, read it, it is going to affect who is willing to be our fiscal sponsor. It basically just cuts it down to zero. And we were like, put it up. And I really love that about the blog, that we are always putting the politics and the struggle first, above resources, above access to platforms, above placating, the sentiments of the Western left. The politics and the revolution are first, and our republishing of that statement, regardless of the consequences for our objectives of what we want to do with the blog, I am really proud of, and I feel like exemplifies how we are accountable again to our movements, to our organizations.
Yeah, definitely. Something I've always appreciated too is y'all always let me publish my one-on-one ass articles that just break down in the most boring ways possible, like some fundamentals, and you don't find that a lot of places.
That's the most important stuff though. That's truly the most important stuff. We're just never going to be able to get away from that. We could have 5 different articles on the blog at a time that are what is capitalism? And probably still be some of the most impactful stuff that we can put on because I feel like there's a lot, I think in US society, there's a lot of people that have kind of just reached a point that they feel like everybody understands this. This is understood at this point, and so there's no need to kind of keep harping on it. But there's so many different levels of comprehension and understanding of these things that we consider basic in the US. And so sometimes you might think that this really basic form of the thing is going to be the thing that connects with this group over here, but maybe it's this thing that comes next week with really good examples and bullet points and numbered, you know what I mean? But I just think we should never give up on the basic stuff. And I agree. I like that is something that Hood Communist is very whenever something happens, the first thing we always look for is an explainer to throw up or share with people or give out to people. And I'm really proud that we have so many of those kinds of things on the blog. What is Pan-Africanism? What is socialism? Erica's has some of the greatest breakdowns on imperialism, I think, that are on the blog.
The guide to the US blockade on Cuba.
The guide to
Yeah.
exactly,
What is AFRICOM?
yes, all of that is always going to be needed because as contradictions continue to heighten in this country, people are going to start to open their eyes to things more and more. And it's great that there's a base that they can go back to and be like, oh, I heard somebody talking about NATO the other day, and I know that it's bad, but I don't really understand what it is. Okay, bam, you can get some from Hood Communists, and it will help you not just understand what NATO is, but like what it means for you, like as an African. So, yeah.
No, I agree. That's probably one of I mean, most is talking whatever because I'm over here like most of my shit is 101. But so like I don't think it's like that. I think it's useful, but I do think that that is one of the things that I value on the blog, like the syllabuses that we put together and how widespread those have come apart. Like there's an intention to teach, it's intention to share the information and not hoard it, right? As the only people that understand it or know it. But to share it with the masses of people as far and wide, and that the guide to the Cuban blockade has been spread all over. The What is AFRICOM syllabus has been spread all over. And I think those things have been really important. Like a lot of our pieces, and not just our pieces specifically as editors, but the things that come out of the blog have been used tremendously, like over the 5 years in different ways in different PEs. I know like I mentioned, I use that Saweetie thing in my capitalism and colonial African. Like, let's all read this together. I got that chart up, I got that diagram up. Let's go through it. Because it's useful and people really understand. And I think that we have created a way to make a lot of this accessible without diluting it, like
Mm.
it's still the line is still there.
Yeah, definitely. Without diluting it is the key part. And something else we do that or at least I do that I don't think a lot of people who read Hood Communists know, a lot of the articles I translate to Spanish and send to Cuban comrades. And so a lot of like Black Cuban organizers are super familiar with Hood Communists. They love Erica's writing. They know Onye's writing. Um, and so, and it's also like a really, really great, yeah, just a great tool overall. I'll put it like that. So without further ado, I'm gonna transition it and give it over, pass the mic over to Salifu. Um, but I appreciate y'all letting us know some of the, behind the scenes for this 5 year, and I'm gonna pass it.
Why? Why? Okay, so it wouldn't be Hood Communists if we didn't come on here and start analyzing some shit. So there's lots going on in the world at this current moment that I feel like we have in the group chat really been trying to wrap our heads around how to respond, how to talk about. But it's just like always, it's like always something. It's always something. And now it feels like it's always like three things. It's always like four things. So I think maybe one of the first areas we can tap into is the Biden-Harris administration and its continued brutal assaults on Latin America. So all across the news, I'll give you guys sort of like the headlines, and then we can just kind of go into the discussion of it. So literally just today, the U.S. seized a plane that belonged to Nicolas Maduro, the president of Nicaragua. I mean, sorry, the president of Venezuela. Basically claiming that he bought it illegally and smuggled it out the country. The basic claim that they're trying to make is that he's in violation of sanctions, right? No, usually when you read these news reports, spoiler, they're not really going to explain to you what sanctions are. But yeah, they want you to know that he's violating sanctions. Um, and this kind of really comes in the middle of a sort of current, ongoing, like really intense, like God, I feel bad for Venezuela at this moment because it's just like nonstop PR attacks over these elections, over oil, over sovereignty. Um, there's also kind of a running parallel thread of like this claim of Venezuelan gangs in Colorado, which is kind of being used to bolster support for like tougher immigration laws, which y'all girl Harris said she got covered. More stirring up the pot against the African communities and immigrant communities in the United States. And I think all of this stuff is really reminiscent of past strategies that we've seen really been weaponized against Cuba and other places in Latin America as well. So I'm just curious to know if you guys have any thoughts on any of that stuff.
Yeah, I can start us off. So I will say this is the first I'm hearing about the plane situation. I've been working all day, so this is news to me. But it's unsurprising. I mean, keep in mind too, the UK just 2 years ago seized millions of dollars of the Venezuelan reserves from their bank. Um, and then also the US attempt at taking over Citgo, the gasoline company, which it's Venezuelan petroleum that sponsors it. And so I think what we see is like this pattern of one, like you said, Salifu, no one ever explains what actual sanctions are and what they mean for people. So you can read a US news article that says the president allegedly violated sanctions, so they confiscated his plane. And even if you don't know what sanctions are, that should raise some red flags. But especially if you don't actually have a basis for what that means, it just sounds random. It just sounds abstract. When in reality, this is an empire that is at war with this country for the sin of attempting to have a socialist revolution. And they have been constantly and constantly and constantly taking from it, exploiting it, and targeting it. And the part that's really egregious to me right now is all of this hysteria around Venezuelan migrants. And like the last week or two, my timeline on TikTok randomly is just nonstop propaganda about these Venezuelan migrants. And it's videos that are like obviously fake, like very, very obviously propaganda, and people are just falling for it. And so it tells me that like because the US for so many years now has vilified, demonized, sanctioned, and been at war with Venezuela, that is now like seeped into sort of the social reality of how people view Venezuela. But I do think that in this moment, despite how much Venezuela is struggling economically due to sanctions, there's like a resilience of the revolution because at the same time they're trying to also steal like the election. The US is trying to like prop up this random ass leader who did not win the election, and now we've had like the highest court in the country of Venezuela has certified that Maduro won. um, this is like the pattern. This is like the copy and paste pattern that they do everywhere, and this is like the Venezuelan flavor. So I'll leave it at there for now and pass it.
I know that Haley America's team probably has remarks. But yeah, I agree. I feel like especially with these recent moves by the US around Venezuela, their attempt to, even before, like out the gate, before the results were confirmed, the US government was like, we didn't accept the results of the election. Then he turned out to win by 1 million votes. The majority of the opposition parties running the election were accepted the results of the election, or at least consented to an investigation and agreed to accept the results. But the people backed by the US were like, from the beginning, like, we're not going to play ball. Everything's invalid. We're going to take it to the streets. And they've been having like their like little block long marches while millions and millions of people are mobilizing in Caracas in support of the PSUV and the Maduro government. So it is like very much a copy paste, but it's like a very like incompetent copy paste, because like Juan Guaido, when they declared him president, that no one knew who he was, no one voted for him, but they declared him president, and they were able to use him to seize Venezuelan assets, to represent in various international spaces. They were able to get other countries to accept that he was the president of Venezuela, like, even though no one knew who he was or voted for him. But now with this latest effort, everybody's like, what are y'all doing? Like, what is this? Like, Maduro won by 1 million votes. Like, it's obvious. Like, it was like they had thousands and thousands of election observers, including people from my organization, but also like bipartisan and non-ideological election observers who certified the results of the elections, that it was extremely well run and transparent. So they really have no leg to stand on. And now they're doing these like desperate maneuvers to attempt to threaten the Maduro government. The policy of the US is that they want Maduro to work with the opposition that lost to organize a transition. And I was like, why would Maduro even do that? It's just like wild delusion from the US government, acts of increasing desperation as more and more and more of the global South starts to turn away from US dominated systems, starts to look for alternatives, starts to build independent relations, South-South relations with each other, because everybody sees the US like flailing and spinning out, and no one wants to be in the path of this. So I think it's just like, it's a very, very incompetent copy paste. It's a sign of desperation.
Yes, the Haiti Americas team does have something to say, but I also think it's important that we highlight that a lot of this, or at least leading up to it, is included on the blog. Like, we talk about sanctions and what is sanctions. We even name Venezuela, and those articles on sanctions ended up being in a book. published. So that's really important just to talk about the significance of it, because the attacks on Venezuela, I don't think people really comprehend sanctions as an act of war as they should be. Upwards of 40,000 people, majority children, majority disabled and elderly, and women, have been killed through sanctions in Venezuela, and it's been consistent. The act, of course, the violent acts in the in the streets from the right wing, where they have burnt an Afro Venezuelan up a few years ago in the during the 2019 elections, like burnt that person, set them on fire. But then also, if you look at what happened a few weeks ago, the chaos that ensued there, right? And then the US was completely behind it. And also, again, since we want to redirect folks to the blog, Salif and I had wrote about the Biden-Harris and the never-ending war. Like, this is part of it. Even the Kamala Harris and the Americas, like this kind of Monroe Doctrine-esque relationship that the Biden-Harris administration has continued, um, and the way that it has treated the Americas, primarily this facade, we're calling it its front yard now. It's supposed to be some new language, as so that we won't remember, or we will disassociate it from the days of when they treated the Americas as its backyard. But what does that mean? That means the expansion of Southcom. That means the like overwhelming sanctions on Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela consistently. Look at what's happening to Haiti, the occupation of Haiti, right? And then to your point, Onye, it is not just the US that is bugging the hell out about Venezuela. I mean, um, Lula and Petro and their nonsense, but you can see this sort of the encapsulation of the pink wave or the pink tide or whatever that's supposed to be, and the social democracy that the US has played on in tandem or in partnership to allow for these things to attack countries like Cuba, Nicaragua, and Haiti. I mean, that have revolutionary spirit and revolutionary history and revolutionary legacy that means something to the Americas, and we can include Puerto Rico in that, right? So that's a lot of the emphasis of why, like, the Haiti Americas team, along with other organizations, would launch something like a zone of peace, recognizing the way that the U.S. approaches the Americas, that denies its sovereignty. So when we see what's happening with Venezuela, we can assume that's happening so long as the Organization for American States exists and can dictate elections. This will continue to happen. We can look at the Nicaragua, who has dismissed the OAS. They are not allowed in Nicaragua at all, right? And that causes a lot of turmoil in the way that the rest of the world approaches Nicaragua in terms of human rights and, you know, free and fair elections and things like that. But it's important to understand, like, this has always been the map and the roadmap for the Americas, and it will continue to be. If we're seeing it under the Biden-Harris administration, we can surely know that Trump tried it with Guaido. We can expect it again. Doesn't matter who is the next president.
Yeah, and I would just like to add too, one of the very strong, because we mentioned Haiti, one of the reasons why the US is so bent on attacking Venezuela, there's several reasons, but one of them is because Venezuela was directly supporting Haiti in attempting to achieve sovereignty through their PetroCaribe
Mm-hmm.
program, which provided lots of, free oil subsidies and whatnot, and oil to the island. And then, of course, the US backed like neo-colonial puppets in Haiti essentially embezzled a lot of that money. Um, and then also to the point of like the US completely fabricating lies on Venezuela. This is actually their playbook. And I'm thinking a lot about Havana syndrome, quote unquote, in Cuba, where they claim and they have yet to identify who is the person doing this, right? But they claim that there are like sonic weapon attacks that in Cuba happened against US workers in the embassy. There's quite literally zero evidence. All medical professionals have said that it's bullshit. And even members of the actual intelligence community themselves have come out and said, like, this is nonsense. And they're still pushing this line around so-called Havana syndrome. And they used it to justify closing down, at this point, near permanently, because it's been years, the US embassy inside of Havana, which creates a lot of tension and stress for Cubans trying to travel, and it creates a lot of other issues for Cubans as well. But like this idea of creating a complete falsified, unverifiable claim and then running with it is part and parcel with what this empire does. And then of course, like, we don't get to talk directly to politicians as the media. You just talk through their little representatives at the press conferences who will just tell you whatever you want to hear, or who will just say whatever they're told to say. And so I think that it's so connected with what's happening in Venezuela, with Cuba and Haiti, because they're all facing this impendum of like lies and falsified justifications for continued bloodshed, slaughter, and exploitation under these sanctioned regimes.
And there's like
Um,
a lot of, oh, sorry, go ahead, Salif.
no, go ahead on you.
Oh, I was just saying, there's like a lot of intersections between the lies. Like, for example, the Venezuelan opposition leader who's backed by the US, Maria Corina Machado, accused the Cuban government of election interference in Venezuela with virtually no evidence. And so there's like this constant like anti-communist dog whistling happening among the US government, but also happening among the reactionary forces that they control, who are constantly pointing the finger at Cuba, at Venezuela, at Nicaragua, and accusing them of like basically like backing socialist revolutions or anti-US government movements in these countries. They're constantly used as a scapegoat to justify intervention, to justify attempts to destabilize them. The other thing I was thinking about is I was randomly watching CBS News, and they were talking about like this new virus that comes from Cuba, like it's called sloth flu, and I was like, this seems like a bunch of bullshit. Yeah,
What?
like exactly. I was just like, they're like, oh, this new thing, it's coming from people coming from Cuba, and it's spreading throughout the US, and like, what do we do? And I was like, oh, another reason to throw shade on Cuba, another reason to get the US public to be immediately inherently suspicious of Cuba, to justify more nonsense around Cuba. And they do this again, like with all the progressive nations across the world: Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Iran, Eritrea, China. Oh yeah, and speaking of China, there's also the straight up made up lie that China's like building a military base in Cuba that no one has ever seen. So yeah, I'll pass it to Sleepy.
I would no, the propaganda part was the part that I was wanting to come back to, because I think for me, one of the most jarring things about being back has been observing just how um enormously rightward everyone is moving, like in a matter of like weeks and months. And I have to say shout out to Two Black and shout out to Dr. Gerald Horn, because there's this like one episode of Black Miss podcast where Dr. Horn is on, and he's talking about how prior to the election of Obama, Africans in the US had consistently been like a anti-war sort of voting bloc politically. And I'm looking at the reactions to Venezuela right now, and I'm monitoring how my people are talking about it, and I'm like, damn, y'all, we're so cooked. Like we're so cooked. Like, why do y'all just believe everything that you see on the news? And it's crazy because working with my students recently, we are at like the point in U.S. history where we're talking about the Monroe Doctrine. And so, like, obviously, the curriculum wants them to understand what's important about the Monroe Doctrine is that it puts an end to European colonization of the Americas. It's like a positive thing, right? Like, it's like, oh, we stopped. Yeah, we came together and we stopped the Europeans from like doing anything over here. So I had to push them on that, like, last week, like, okay, so this is what you understand about Monroe Doctrine. This is what the primary sources that you're analyzing say. Now I want you to read this thing right here by a woman named Erica Keynes. Go ahead, just read this. It's about front yard politics. Just read this, and then we're going to have a conversation afterwards. And like, it was really incredible. They started reading the article, and the first thing they said was, this person must be a Trump supporter. I was like, no, keep reading, because they weren't used to that kind of open criticism of the Democratic Party, of Joe Biden, of Kamala Harris. And then by the time they got to the end, they were like, oh, like, we really are like the bad guys. And I was like, wow, you got it. Yes, I'm not even gonna try to add any nuance to that. Yes, you are correct. But so many people in the US don't have interactions like that on a regular basis. And so when you see this kind of propaganda, whether it's toward Venezuelans, whether it's toward Cubans, whether it's toward Chinese people, North Koreans, and the intensity with which our people are being hit over the head with it all the time, it really does, like, it concerns me a lot, like, especially with, don't, like, now we got to sprinkle in like all the anti-blackness discourse. Oh, the anti-black brigade, they are just out of control. I'm so tired of those people. Like, I can't take it anymore. I know we're not at that part in the conversation yet, but yeah, it's just like, yeah, like, if, like, there just has to be a lot of loud and constant pushback to a lot of these media narratives that are being created right now.
I would just add real quick too, like Salifu, you know, you and I have like a ongoing stream of DMs on TikTok when we just send each other just disgusting propaganda all day long. But it's probably really unhealthy, honestly. But um, I think we often have a reaction to like completely ignore or look away from the really absurd things where we're like, that's obviously propaganda. That's obviously like whether it's someone saying some talking points for Kamala, whether it's some Venezuelan migrant stuff, whether it's Hebrew Israelites talking about we're the original natives, but we're also from Israel, whatever it might be. I think we have to do a better job of like listening to that propaganda and really developing like strategic ways to combat it, because the Venezuelan migrant stuff is wild. Like it, if you all just go on your social medias like TikTok or whatever and search Venezuelan migrants, the stuff that comes up is almost like it was written in like a Tim Burton movie, the way they're talking about these things. They're making claims that there's like entire Venezuelan gangs taking over entire neighborhoods. Like it's just very on its nose fake propaganda getting millions of likes and like thousands of people agreeing with it. So I would
Y'all
just
see what's going on in Venezuela? This shit crazy. Like, that's all I see when I go on Facebook. And I'm
yeah,
like, y'all don't even ever talk about Venezuela. Ever. You never talk about Venezuela. And now all of a sudden, everybody is an expert on
yeah,
Venezuelans.
yeah,
It's crazy. It's
yeah.
crazy.
So I just recommend people lean into it and like actually study and listen to what's being said. Otherwise, you're stuck in an algorithmic bubble and you're not actually dealing with what's actually being said by our opposition. I would definitely say that.
I just want to add too that that kind of propaganda doesn't just stop here within the U.S. It is spread throughout the Americas. Um, like for instance, the lie about Haitian migrants that are traveling to Nicaragua, that Nicaragua was using them for political influence or whatever, which doesn't make any sense to gain favor with the US because the US thinks so highly of Haitians that that would help Nicaragua gain favor. But also the point of Venezuelans, like that's a issue in Trinidad, right? It's also right there, the Venezuelan migrant situation and the propaganda around that. So these are things that are followed throughout the Americas, but it, you know, you can always see a baseline and foundational that it is a bunch of propaganda that is in favor of U.S. imperialism. Like it works on behalf of U.S. imperialism and U.S. imperialist interests, especially when we think about who and where and how and why these things are spreading, and who it's targeting. I think it's really important to understand that it doesn't just stop here. So even in our criticism of it, we have to make that international as well because it is across, like it's not, this is not propaganda that they're just only stopping with us. It is all over the Americas. And it is to detach people from you know, Nicaragua, Cuba, Haiti and Venezuela, like to not see the revolutionary histories and not to not understand it in that way. We've seen that with the Summit of the Americas and them being ousted and the sort of show that the Caribbean was doing on the behalf of solidarity, and then everybody still fucking went to the summit. Um, but yeah, they even invited the de facto prime minister. But I think that shows the kind of contradictions that exist in the Americas and why people need to pay attention to it. And why we should also start to begin to see ourselves as part and parcel because Musa, you know, you and I talk about this. Understanding Cop City is not dissimilar from the School of the Americas or Guantanamo Bay.
Facts. Facts. I guess I'll just like dump some more bullshit in here since we're talking about all of it. there's no way we can like not talk about Gaza at this point because the genocide is continuing and the US hasn't slowed down its support at all. I mean, in fact, our president hopeful Kamala Harris is very blatantly coming out now and saying that she will never entertain the concept of an arms embargo. But she wants a ceasefire because that's like it's possible to do that. It's very possible to just keep giving people guns to beat my ass while telling me that you want them to stop beating my ass. That's actually how conflict resolution works. um but I mean, there's also just in general the whole sort of campaign, the way identity is being thrown out. I guess we can kind of get into the conversation about how this really intense sort of propaganda campaign to turn US born Africans like against every group. Like I have the 13% of the country and we're supposed to like fight the entire planet because other people told us to. It's weird. But that's kind of where we are right now. So yeah, I'm gonna open the floor for us to maybe talk a little bit about that.
I really appreciated that you pointed out the absurdity of Biden and Harris being like, we're working really, really hard. We're working tirelessly 24/7 around the clock to get a ceasefire. Like, it's out of their hands, right? Like, the US is literally sending the guns and the bombs and the money. It would not be happening without the material support of the United States. The United States is enabling it in every way, not just by sending the guns and the bombs that are like murdering babies in Gaza, but also by providing Israel like political and diplomatic cover across the international stage. So like it's so like I'm very glad that the demand of a ceasefire has now become a demand for an arms embargo because that's more clear about what needs to happen. And I also think that it has exposed that Kamala Harris is not going to represent a change in policy when it comes to US backing of genocide in occupied Palestine because people were, I don't know what's happening because I remember the first time she tried to run for president and everybody was like clowning the shit out of her. And now all of a sudden she's being packaged like Barack Obama. Like all of a sudden she's competent when we have all seen the videos of a woman rambling for like 3 minutes without making a clear point. All of a sudden she is an anti-war candidate when she has run for the entirety of her career on backing US imperialism. She's received $5 million from AIPAC. She's a straight up Zionist. But when she, stepped in for Biden after Biden was intentionally pushed out by all of his homies, she stepped in for Biden, and all of these people started being like, this is different. This is an opening. This is an opportunity. We can push her. It was Biden doing that. It wasn't Harris. And then at each turn, every time people present that rationalization, she comes out and says, no. Like what happened with the uncommitted people who were like, oh, she agreed to have a meeting to talk about an arms embargo. And like the next day she came out and she's like, no, I didn't. And then she had that interview recently, where she was asked about like if she's going to continue Biden's policy in Gaza. And she was like, absolutely yes. And not only that, I will never stop sending weapons to Israel. Like she is clear, despite all the people projecting progressive or anti-imperialist values on her, it is not going to represent a change of policy in terms of backing genocide in occupied Palestine.
Yeah, well, it was a coup, if you ask me. Like, because I watched the DNC. At first, I wasn't too sure. Like, a lot of, this doesn't make any sense. It's only been 2 weeks. Where has all this hype come from? And then you listen to the speakers who talk about the years they have gotten to know Kamala, which leads me to believe that all this time we thought she was a babbling fool. She was lobbying behind the scenes and stacking up delegates, okay, and waiting her moment because she came out and she was in full support. Joe Biden can do it. He can do it. And the second that, they pushed him out the gate, she was ready and available. And I also think that 88 million is why we have a lot of people who are freaking delusional now. I do not think there is delusion. I think that people are paid, just like we knew people were paid in 2020. There are careerist liberals out here. We see that on TikToks. We see that on the Facebook status. We see that in these threads from movement leaders who are lawyers who are attached to no movement, right? So like we can't pretend like people ain't making $1 here and there behind this because the 88 million is being used somewhere. And I think once they saw that, that she has the capability of making that in one night, just in a matter of hours, then everybody jumped on board. Then we got the Obamas, and then we got, so it's like, okay, we're just going to push her. But she still is dry, and she's still a babbling fool if you ever listen to her interviews. She was just on with Ari Member today talking about prison reform and the criminal justice system. And she was talking about that we have to be honest about how all of these policies are a problem because they started from a war waged on us, a war like the war on drugs. And I said, oh, this bitch is using all our shit now. And why would you mention the war on drugs? Are you not the vice president to the man? Right? But she's saying this like she has nothing to do with it. And we see that with Gaza. And I just want to be clear with the uncommitted. The fact that they even thought that was a meeting, they were literally walking by. Literally walking by. She stopped. She did the photo op thing. They asked her a quick question before she left. She said, and they ran to online and said, yes, she said we're going to have a meeting. Like, so I don't know, because they have already conceded long before Kamala was chosen. They had already conceded because they compromised. If you do these things, we will. Right? And then it became, well, if you do some of these things, half of these things, one thing, and then it became no.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much more to add to that. I think that just last week I was looking at really old tweets from back when you were still on Twitter, Erica, and it was me and you tweeting each other about identity reductionism in like 2016, specifically around Obama at the time, I think. But I could only see like my half of the tweets because your account suspended, of course.
Newt.
Famously.
Never to return.
famously booted off. But
I saw that. That's what you get.
But it was like really mind-boggling that we were actually having pretty much almost the exact same conversation, maybe a little bit less politically developed, but we're talking about, and we were also talking about Bernie, and there's this way that like anything that is even remotely quote unquote progressive appearing whatsoever just gets reduced to this person's entire political aura, right? Like, oh, Bernie said the word socialism. Oh my God. Oh, Kamala went to Howard. What? And it's just like, I think the idea of identity reductionism, and I know you've written about it, is so important because it's how an entire politics can get reduced to one's identity. And so Kamala Harris herself is like the right-hand person of the mass incarcerationist himself. After a career of locking up Black people, of literally being a prosecutor, right? Like your job is to prosecute people, to send Black people to prison. So watching this media try to spin her as someone who's anything, I mean, just earlier this year, they were putting clips of like Veep, that show on HBO, where it's all about the
Fantastic show.
hilarious show, all about the vice president being a bumbling idiot. They're like putting clips of Veep next to Kamala, the real life VP, and making fun of her. Like this all year long since she's been VP, she's been the joke, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they try to flip a switch. But what's interesting is I saw recently after the DNC, her numbers did not increase whatsoever.
No,
she had a a 0% boost, and that's how uncharismatic. But what I really want people to think about is like, if you think of this election as an audition, they are not auditioning for us. They are auditioning for capital. They are trying to signal to weapons manufacturers. They're trying to signal to big pharma, big agricultural industry. They are signaling to those people. She's saying, I can be just as bloodthirsty as everyone else. I can be just as ruthless and exploitative as everyone else. She is not trying to signal to us, the working people, that we, oh, I can get done what you want done. And then I think as it relates to Gaza, like it has just heightened the contradiction so much that people either have to just say, I am okay with genocide via US imperialism, or say you're not. And I think it's gotten to a point where people do not know what to do when they're left with like this mortal contradiction for some people. And so I think that is where the work of organizers and places like Hood Communist becomes really, really, really important. Because if you don't have a revolutionary like ideology that's guiding what you do, when you hit a contradiction that you cannot reconcile, you don't do dialectics. Like you're not, you know what I'm saying? You're not going to do historical materialism. You're going to fall into whatever is comfortable, whatever is the easiest, and whatever the entire apparatus is pushing you towards. And so people are coming up against these contradictions, and I call them mortal contradictions because for some people, they've literally never thought this deep before about
Mm-hmm.
US imperialism as they have in the last 11 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And then I'll also say, I want like, it's so offensive. It is so offensive that they bring it's cognitive dissonance. It's just they bring rappers on stage to twerk, and you're trying to make me like believe in you as a politician, so you bring out like strippers. Remember when they did that campaign like get your booty to the pole, and it was like strippers targeting black men? I'm so offended. I like
It's always
how
the Democrats too.
they are telling you that you have a fifth grade reading level. Like they are looking in your eyes and calling you dumb. And like that is not this is not normal. This is a dystopian society. You don't see that in other countries. Even other capitalist countries don't necessarily have like the dumbass shit we have. So yeah, man, it's bleak out here sometimes.
It makes me it makes me it's one of the things I really do miss about being in Burkina Faso. Just to be honest, just like politicians having like an actual presence, and then like when they speak they like actually say things of substance. And I feel like this is probably one of the things that I wish I had been alive for to experience, like in Cuba, like when people talk about Fidel Castro, and how he would like go into the streets and like make 3-hour speeches about like political economy, and people would just stand there on their feet for like 3 hours and just sit there and listen to this man like break things down. I think that like citizens of the United States would actually have a stroke if a politician actually opened their mouth and like said something that was A, true, and B, of substance. I don't think people would even know how to react to that, like how to even receive that. But it also makes me feel sad that because I like, you know, being back in like the public school system and everything, so many of like my coworkers and like my administrators, everybody's doing the black girl magic thing right now. Everybody is like, oh, we got to get our kids excited. We need to get them, our seniors, excited to register to go vote. This is such a huge like election in their lifetime. And then I'm the person secretly in the dark in the classroom, like drawing a picture of the Overton window on the whiteboard and being like, so this is where we are. And like, but it makes me sad that so many people that I know genuinely believe that they are engaged in like real politics, and they've never experienced it in their lives. It's always been theater. It was theater from
Mm-hmm.
like the beginning. It's theater now. It's going to continue to be theater until the eventual collapse of the United States. But it does make me really sad because I see how invested people get, and they're like all into it, and they're like, yes, we have, it's our time. We got to do this. We got to mobilize. We got to get on this Zoom call, Black women for Kamala Trump. We got to outnumber the white women on the call. I'm like watching people do these things, and I'm like, you're yearning for participation in a process. It's very clear you want this kind of political experience. You want control of, you want some level of self-determination and control and input in what happens in your day-to-day life, but you just have not found like a realistic sort of method or medium to do that. So it just makes me really sad all the time. Election season is so depressing.
Yeah. Election season, that's where all the good organizers are wasted. Because like you said, like that's a skill to be able to mobilize the people, and they're wasted and captured within that party each and every election. So a few things. I do think, to your point, there is like people have never engaged in that sort of political process where they are understanding it, or what that even means to be engaged in a political process, because they've never really engaged in politics, right? And I think when you explain that to people, even in the sense where like having the chance, each of us have gone to these revolutionary countries and seen the difference, like to come back and engage in these particular conversations with people who have never waged revolution and have never won revolution, and to hear the sort of like kind of egotistical and chauvinistic way that they approach viewing the world, right? And I think that is also the dilemma with that kind of blockage that's we're seeing people, because I can watch someone watch the news about Gaza and be like, oh my God, do you know what's going on there? And that same breath say we have to get Trump out because it'd be the worst thing. Did you hear about Project 2025? And there's a I don't know if it's a tweet or a meme. I can't tell these days. I can't keep up with you young kids. But it was like, have you heard of Project 2025? It's like, have you heard of Genocide 2024? Like, like,
I'm
what you
sorry.
mean? We're
It's
supposed to
true.
be
Like, what
worried
are we
about
talking
what could
about?
happen, right? And I think that they have mastered the art. When Musa, when we started doing working together with abolition, I've always said like the Democratic Party is the party of pity. No, she doesn't speak to the working class. She doesn't even acknowledge the working class. It's the middle class, honey. What workers? What workers? We talking to the private sector and the middle class, right? And there is no middle class, so they get to get away with that, right? Because that's a fleeting thing that comes and goes. So they get to get away with addressing the class that never is, never was, and probably never could be under these dynamics, right? But as long as it exists somewhere, they're allowed to speak to that and never have to address workers. They can talk about working struggles, but they never address workers at all. And they've gotten away with that for so long. And the workers themselves are so used to not even being included. There's a sort of aspiration to be the middle class too. Like, yeah, because if we get hunting, then we know we're about to get the housing back. And it's like, where? Where have you seen this done? So you know what I'm saying? So there is a that hope, right? And there's people's hopes are relying on these people because they've never engaged in politics and they do want to be involved in the process, but they also fully aware that this shit is grim. And when you are propagandized day in and day out that the worst thing that could happen to us is Trump. Fuck what you're seeing right now. The worst thing that could happen to us is Trump. Then it becomes this agitation. We got to get people out there. We got to hurry up and do this. And nobody really wants to hear it at all. Like it's a strong blockage, and not necessarily because it's her, but because she represents something.
I think that something I think about a lot is Walter Rodney when he talks about underdevelopment. He's not just talking about economics, he also talks about political, mental, and cultural underdevelopment, and how, as Africans, our political institutions, our ways of organizing ourselves in society, our very philosophies and sort of culture have all been underdeveloped by the colonial system. And I feel as though we've seen a microcosm of this underdevelopment from the inception of the War on Black Liberation, especially around the COINTELPRO era up till today. We've seen in just a few decades, we've seen our very politics in our African communities be underdeveloped by the Democratic Party itself. And I think people don't like grapple enough with what it means that there's like an entire generations, plural now, who have not actually participated in actual real organizing and who now think that what they are doing is the real organizing. And so, like, there's an article on Hood Communist I wrote called Boston Bot about Stacey Abrams and how in 2020 there were uprisings in the streets, pig precincts are burning. We're talking about abolishing the police, making connections to imperialism, all of these things. And then Abrams slash Warnock and Ossoff in Georgia, they convince the majority of people in Atlanta who would have become perhaps community organizers or something. They convinced them that the most important thing to do if you're upset about this murder of George Floyd is to make sure Stacey Abrams can win as governor and that we can fight quote unquote voter suppression. And they started to create part-time jobs, or they're like organizing jobs is like what it said on the job title, but all it was like canvassing and phone banking for Democratic candidates, right, and doing voter registration. So it literally took thousands of would-be organizers and activists and bought them up and put them and funneled them into the Democratic Party. And so again, like here in Atlanta, I like this underdevelopment analogy. It just underdeveloped our entire grassroots organizing sector. And then one other point that Onya and I were talking about it in the chat, and you might have more to say on it, was like, one of the reasons you need to internationalize your politics is not because like what's happening abroad is more or less important. It's not about like Olympics of what's most important. It's so that you can recognize how fucked up your own situation is. And so like if you compare the leaders in the US, the politicians, and you watch an interview with like go watch Kamala Harris's that first interview she did on CNN, and they were like, "What are you going to do on your first day in office?" And she starts talking about, "I'm going to restore hope and joy to the middle class." And then the reporter's like, okay, so no day one policy. And then she names the Child Care Welfare Act, which is already like but then you compare that to like Diaz Canal in Cuba. He will go on, there's a show called Mesa Redonda, which you can watch on YouTube. He'll go on there for 2 or 3 hours live on TV talking about economy, politics, culture, current events, whatever the Cuban people deem most important at that time, they're asking him. They're asking live questions in the audience. The journalists will grill him. If there's an unpopular policy, he will have to answer to it. And think of like Traore, um, over in Burkina Faso. Traore is like once a week he's giving these hour-long lectures basically, if not longer, and he's breaking everything down and he's speaking directly to the people with clarity, lucidity, and transparency. Is there any equivalent that in my lifetime in the US, I can't think of a single equivalent. So if you just go and watch what people in other leaders, politicians in other countries, how they talk to their constituents versus here, this shit is like a Bravo reality TV show. No shade, Erica. It's really like, it's wild over here.
Yeah.
And
I also
also,
think oh, go ahead, Onion.
sorry, yeah, like I really appreciate Ricky pointing out that people are taking these positions, uplifting Kamala Harris as progressive because they're taking money to do so. I feel like that's really important. I also feel like there's like some astroturfing happening to drive a divide between African and Palestinian people that's very intentional, that has like the stench of the DNC all over it.
Onye, when you use the word astroturfing, what does that mean?
Basically like they got like a bunch of influencers on TikTok, paid them to produce all and release this content at the same time, to uplift the idea of like inherent Palestinian anti-Blackness,
Mm,
and drop a wedge between us. But I wanted to say that the ruling class in the US has worked very intentionally to cultivate an electorate, a populace that can be marketed to on like a very that does not think critically. Like they want to make it so they can just put up an Obama picture version of Kamala Harris and people will project their hopes, dreams, and aspirations onto Kamala Harris. They want to develop an understanding of so-called fascism that makes people believe that it's possible to like vote it out. Like even the idea that like Trump is an existential threat and that somehow that threat can be stopped by voting in a bourgeois election doesn't actually make sense. That's never been how fascism develops. Like, what are y'all talking about? But they want the US public to believe that. So it's not that people here are just inherently foolish and stupid. It's that this has been intentionally developed over a very, very long period of time. It's why they disinvest in schools or like privatize public schools. It's why the media is constantly focused on shit that doesn't matter, like celebrity gossip, particularly like the African media, because they're not wanting to produce critical thinkers or engaged citizens. They're wanting to produce a very controllable population. And Musa has a really excellent article on Hood Communists, the Materialist Guide to Media Literacy, where
mm,
you are comparing and contrasting like the Cuban Revolution's focus on increasing literacy to increase the political participation of the mass of people in Cuba versus the US with one of the lowest literacy rates in the developed world that is like shutting down schools across the country, particularly in African and colonized people and poor and working class people's communities, because they do not want critical thinkers. They do not want engaged voters. They want people that they can just like put up a commercial or like play a particular song and like get them to feel a certain way and act in a certain way.
yeah. It's also the way you can see that joy has been manufactured. Like you can definitely tell when something is a memo and it has reached the pundits, because you watch it develop over time. Like this word just came out of nowhere, and it's exactly a play on Black Joy, right? Which was a development out of the 2020 election. We've seen everybody run into the streets with their champagne bottles and say, "Yes, we did it. We beat out fascism." Oh, but wait, it's back. So because she can't vote it out. So, I think also the way that we even discuss Kamala, I think it's a good time to point out Salifu's piece about more than a silk press, because the way that she has been, and that's why I think it's really has been a coup. Like we have been made to believe or think that she's been doing nothing, and she's been doing a lot. Like even to the point of the occupation of Haiti. She's all in that. And when she went to CARICOM last summer, her and Hakeem Jeffries, right? So and the Americas was given to her. So that's why they call her like the czar, the border czar, or whatever other Republicans call her. But a lot of that was because she was assigned to take care of the Americas, and that was your position. And if you can look at the last 4 years and what has developed there, and it was under her, we can't play like she's just some innocent bystander. Like she's not the Veep. It's not that show, right? And I think it's been intentional to make it look like she's just out here getting silk presses and wearing her chucks and skipping through onto Africa, and just so happens to be in Jamaica, just so happens to be in Guatemala, but she ain't doing nothing. She's just wearing her chucks, hanging out. But but I think it's really important that we highlight these things, and again, it speaks to the consistency of the blog. When Kamala Harris was announced as the nominee, before everybody overwhelmingly decided that they're going to hitch their wagon to that, people were already referencing things that we've already written 5 years ago, 4 years ago, about this woman, about identity reductionism, about mammy, don't be a mammy for empire. So I think it's really important that we have remained consistent, and that the blog is a reference point for folks who are now understanding these concepts, because we have people who they were not voters in 2020. They were still in high school. They were freshmen, right? And now they're coming up on high school, and this is all brand new to them. And we have this reference point of her communists, because I do think, to you all's point, these 101s are very important, because they are not the thing about what I've noticed even in the last decade, I want to say, since Mike Brown, right, is that there has not been enough studying of the movements that we have engaged in since Mike Brown. Like once that's done, quote unquote, we move on to the next. And there's no looking back at what worked, what didn't work, what are some things that we can look for that we should be spotting out. Because that's evident in the way that they're not even bothering to change up a little bit of how they're doing all of this shit. We've already seen this playbook in 2020, verbatim, the way that they're using influencers, the way that they're using celebrities, right? The language is coming out about joy and hopes and dreams. We've seen this, and they're not bothering to switch it up because it worked. And if we can't go back and look, which again is why I think the blog is a value. If we can't go back and assess, like, oh, this is where we fucked up, and we can't do that again. If we can't do that, then we're going to keep running into this.
Yeah, I think on that point, one, when people talk about like 2020 was this watershed moment, I want to really uplift Brother Two Black and his book Laundering Black Rage to really help provide us some political and ideological clarity around these uprisings. But also, people forget, like, there were over 13,000 people arrested at those protests nationwide that summer. 13,000 people. And like we have no account of that, no, like, we have to think through what that means. To your point earlier though, about TikTokers going to the White House and stuff, because I work in communications and I have worked with influencers in the past, I I I want people to know how it works. It's not like the CIA is like, hey, I need you to say these talking points. It's like, hey, we're having 100 influencers to the White House for a social event to show y'all the things we have going on. And they arrive, they get goodie bags, they get this expensive catering, they're treated. you could be the most apolitical influencer ever. And you receive this invitation to the White House and you start to feel important. And you're like, oh shit, maybe I should go. Genocide in Gaza, yeah, but also like picture with Kamala Harris. And so they're preying upon like a base of opportunism that already exists in capitalism, right? Like there is an opportunistic kind of trend that in capitalism, we all want opportunity, we all want profit primarily. And so they're playing on that right there. So it's not always as nefarious as like someone sent an email with the specific talking points, but it is also that a lot of the time too. But I just, you know, and then the last thing is you mentioned earlier, Erica, how like they are incorporating specific language from us to resell it under their democratic ticket. What was really eerie and shocking for me was Warnock's speech at the DNC. And I texted y'all in the group chat as soon as it happened. And I was listening like in the background. Here in Atlanta, and Warnock is from here in Atlanta, like the district is right down the road from where we do all of our BAP events and everything. We have been very specifically not just talking about Gaza, but really, really, really trying to tie it specifically to Haiti, Sudan, and Congo. Those have been like that has been our campaign for the last year straight, pretty much. We have people, organizations, and individuals have interrupted Warnock's church and protested in his church, uplifting those specific places. And so when I heard in his speech, he said, we have to care about the children. And this is like a near quote. We have to care about the children of Israel, just like the children of Gaza. Mind you, they're very intentional to never say Palestine, right? They'll say Gaza or they'll say West Bank. And then he says, just like the children of Haiti, just like the children of Cuba, just like the children of Sudan, and the crowd goes wild. That is direct co-optation. He is looking at the language us here locally in Atlanta and elsewhere are using and directly pulling it. That's just like Kamala using the word self-determination when she's talking about Palestine. How do you define self-determination underneath occupation and while you're funding and arming the genocide? So I think we have to be really clear that there is like a dialectical thing going on where like the more and more our ideas spread, the more and more people fuck with what we're saying. Sorry, we didn't say if we were going to cuss tonight or not. That's my bad. But you know,
We always cursing. I'm sorry. There's no need to apologize. We just curse. It's a cursing. We curse on this channel, guys. We curse.
So I just want people to think about that. Like the more that our slogans and our campaigns advance, the more that they are very, very, very clearly paying attention and trying to like cherry pick and divert and create distractions for people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree, and you know it succeeds also because we have very short memories, and I think it goes back to everything that we talked about with media literacy, the gutting of public education, so on and so forth. But like something I think about all the time, like when I go on Black Agenda Report sometimes, and I'm just like searching for certain things to see what they were saying at certain periods of time. There was like I remember, do y'all remember when Russia first began its military operation in Ukraine? And the way that BAP, the APRP, Hood Communist, uh, um, um, uh, every Black left organization and uh media site, we were all engaged in struggle around this question of like whether or not what Russia was doing was progressive or not. And like there was so much struggle about what Ukraine represents and like this concept of like self-determination. And then we got into all the political education about NATO. Like poor Jackie. I feel like Jackie was like on live like every other day giving in-depth like breakdowns of like the history of the Soviet Union leading to today. Like it was like really intense. Like I also point back to that in my mind as like a really sort of watershed moment where a lot of things started to make themselves clear in our own circles. But there was just like so much discussion about so much back and forth, so much was done, so much clarity was given. But then so many people never really came back around and like self
Mm-mm.
for pushing a lot of really incoherent and like bad positions on Ukraine. And like now we like fast forward, right? So we gone from even like Russiagate, the Russiagate stuff, like Black Agenda Report, like every week being like, stop being stupid, stop falling for this. To then we come to now, right, where we're getting online and we're reading Ukrainian support for ISIS in the Sahel, right? How do we get here? How did we get here? But if you are like nonetheless aware, all of these things, they just randomly happen like all the time, and there's really no connection. So there's no need to pay attention to anything. There's no need to have like a coherent sort of ideology that guides the way that you think or you approach the world. But now here we are in August of 2024, and we're seeing Ukraine, which we had correctly identified as a Nazi state, like no nuance. I'm not adding no nuance to that. A not Nazi state, right? In direct support of ISIS in Africa, like. But we never have to come back around. We never come back around and have these full circle moments about sort of what it means to hold a line, what it means to like share a position or be challenged on a position. And I think that's really a big part of what kind of is holding us back, not just us, but like generally as a country, is that there's not really an aptitude for struggle around positions or ideas. And so people today who are like, oh, well, we have to vote for Kamala Harris because Trump is absolutely going to be worse for Palestine than she will be. These people are never actually going to have to reckon with the fact that that is not true until it's like too late. And then we get to the point where we write the history book, and then it's just like, oh well, yeah, it was a genocide, and like so many people were against it, and like then we start rewriting history and all this kind of stuff. But I'm just like, I realize nobody really wants to talk about the Ukraine supporting ISIS in the
Yeah.
Sahel thing, because it would like directly force you to reckon with a really bad position that you had like just last year. Like just last year.
Yeah. But I also think it's the same with why the uncommitted movement exists to whatever extent that it exists, and then why we have people who are empathetic to Kamala in the sense that they do believe that she would be different, because these are people who never had to reckon with saying that Biden would be better for Palestine than Trump. And when he was elected, those people are now front row in the front lines for Palestine, but they never have to take an account for saying that and pushing Biden and voting for, not only voting, campaigning on behalf of Joe Biden, because they had that belief that he would be better, because Trump just gave Jerusalem over to Israel. So the idea, without any kind of historical, like, this is the same man who said if there was no Israel, they would create one. But he is somehow more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause when he has never in the history of any of his politics ever shown that. But these ideas that people can be pushed left, nobody has to reckon with being pushed left or not doing any of the pushing. They don't ever have to reckon with that. And when the time they have to reckon with Iran and Islamic imperialism, like, but again, it's a lot of ego and chauvinism in the way that people even approach, like when we ask people who never had to and don't have, we're talking about the level of literacy and critical thinking and things like that. We're asking people to have a more worldly view, engage internationally, and they're engaging it from a very chauvinist and egotistical perspective because they only understand individualism, because they only understand perspectives that come out of here. So their whole approach, even when we take people to Cuba, right? The whole idea is that, oh, but yeah, we heard from those Afro-Cubans, but we ain't hear from like the real Afro-Cubans, as if they're like being hidden somewhere in the cut. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's the same, like, because the idea
And
that,
then and
sure,
then
it's
you
a
and then you
curated.
And then you speak with Africans in Cuba and they're like literally quoting Fidel Castro.
Right, because it's a sure we can argue it's a curated trip. Obviously, we want you to hear from certain people, but at the same time, you speak to these people on the street and they know their history. Everybody not as politically inclined. Just like here, like you can't walk up to nobody randomly and get the whole one-on-one of what's happening with the racists in America. So the idea that you think that you could do that in Cuba, and if you can't get that in Cuba, then it means, oh, everybody has just lied to me about racism in Cuba because I spoke to this one random person, right? And like, you know, me and Rafiki laugh all the time because we went back to Bluefields and this man remembered us from the last time we were there because he's like African. He don't remember our names, but he remembered the conversation. And this is a man that we met on the street that can run down his whole history, give you the whole history of Corn Island and Bluefields and all of that. Right. And obviously he's doing that because he want a little change. But but he knows it. And just like you could stop somebody in Cuba, an African in Cuba, and they know it. So however they understand or comprehend or explain it to you is different, but they know their history. We don't. And we go in there unknowing of our own shit. We have, again, wage no revolution, won no revolution. And we go in there to tell those people, oh, well, I heard what you said. I don't know.
Have you ever considered anti-blackness? Have you? It's in the soil. Did you know it's like a part of the dust in the galaxy?
It's in the stars.
It's the cosmos. The cosmos. Yeah.
I do feel like that's the what we are living through is like the consequences of separating the condition of African people from what produced it, which is colonialism and imperialism, right? Like if it's just something that's always existed in the hearts of men and it always will, then there's nothing you can do about it and it's around every corner. But if you understand it specifically as a tactic of colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, then there's like a concrete beginning and there's a concrete end through organized action. Yeah, Africans going to Cuba and telling Cubans to their face they're lying about their own conditions is definitely a thing that happens on every delegation to the US. But one thing this conversation was making me think of is that there are some people who accept that Kamala Harris will not be better for Palestine, but say that they still have to, you know, back a genocide backer because she's going to mean improved conditions for Africans in the US, which is like wildly absurd. It's really intense. But I just wanted to talk about that because that's like one of the main pieces of pushback we get. Either it's like, but do you want Trump? Or we got to worry about ourselves and we got to get ourselves together here.
Right. Before, I just want to raise a question to that point, and then y'all can respond to that because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like, so it's not true that they should be better domestically here for African people. But what if it were, right? What if it were true? What are we actually saying? That as long as we're good, fuck everybody else? And I also like, what is the ethical like component of that? Like, what is the humanity I just feel like we are being exposed as Africans here in the empire as just like we don't have a level of humanity that we think we do. Because if that's the, what if she did? What if we did raise up to the middle class, right? Everybody got housing, and everybody, you know, unemployment rose, you know, went low, and everybody got a job. But on the other side of the world, 163,000 people are dead, majority children. 6 million Congolese people are dead. All right, 20 million freaking Sudanese people are being displaced. Haiti is still occupied, but we can eat.
Well, Erica, I'm sorry, I have to stop you because there's so many things you're not considering. First of all, you're not considering the fact that we are the only people that were ever enslaved, that Africa literally sold us and abandoned us. You're not considering anti-blackness throughout the rest of the world. So this victory in Harris, you need to let us have this. We have to get in where we can fit in, okay? The whole world is anti-black.
Salivu, I can't stand you. I was about to make a point and you just erased it right off the map. I think that I think to a point that was raised earlier, even in just the most practical terms, right? I think it was Salif who said this. We are 13% of the population. So we're supposed to be at war with literally everyone except our actual real oppressors who brought us here and who have exploited us for 500 years. Like we're supposed to be, everyone is anti-black. We're at war with everyone. We have to create a strong divide between what happens in the US and elsewhere for the sake of our own comforts. And we mad at everybody but the literal capitalists who are controlling both of these parties that people are voting for. And I just feel like the logic is not logicking. But I also think like it's very forced that we are being told to think of our I think the big word I'm hearing is like safety. Like, oh, if you want black people to be safe and not have to live in Trump's America, quote unquote, like the fact that our alleged safety is being put as like opposite of stopping a genocide in Palestine is in and of itself disgusting, but let alone untrue. Like we've had the last Biden's been in office for 4 years now, and how many black people have been killed by the police? The incarceration rate of black women specifically has increased a lot in the last 3 years, right? The incarceration rate of black men has continued to increase. And so, like, what are we talking about? Like, there is a war against Africans no matter who is in office. And I think that is the point. And it's also like imperialism is the main mode of accumulating capital for the capitalist class. At the very base, imperialism is the mode through which the capitalist class is accumulating its capital that they hoard, that they lord over us, that they use to impact our politics, that they use to exploit and dry us. That means that imperialism is our primary contradiction too, right? So that means like when they're building cop cities, that is imperial violence. That means when they're doing the 1033 program and the Gilly program, like this is all connected to imperialism because that is the main mode of accumulating capital. And that like sounds abstract to some people who don't have the language and the reading, but then there's some people who know that and who just don't care. And I think that like we also need to be real that there's a lot of people who have just been pretending to care about Gaza or Sudan. A lot of people who couldn't find Sudan or Congo on a map until people started talking about Palestine. And then suddenly it was, what about Congo? What about Sudan? Despite us for years talking about these places. So I think we have to be real. There's also a lot of people who do not give a fuck and who are done pretending that they don't give a fuck. And Kamala is giving them an excuse to say out loud, I don't care about the rest of the world. And I think she's giving them that excuse to just fully say that.
Yeah. But they're pragmatic about it, of course. They're practical.
Pragmatic.
They're practical.
Pragmatic genocide.
Practical, yeah. Right. You have to be practical.
But those are the people that you were calling out are paid, are beings of pure opportunism, are angling for their own personal professional advancement. Like there's a distinct difference between the people who are just like confused and the people who are making a conscious decision and presenting it as progressive. The other thing that I think is really important is like what Musa just broke down about how imperialism functions is why Kamala Harris could never mean better conditions for African people, and why, in fact, no candidate that runs with any of these bourgeois parties, any of these ruling class parties could mean better conditions for African people or for any poor and oppressed people in the United States. Like they're the what they are going for, the strategy they are pursuing is clearly escalating repression, surveillance, and control. Like they aren't like the number of Africans murdered by police did not just happen to go up after Biden, after the George Floyd uprising in 2020. They did not just happen to pledge additional resources and funding for police in the aftermath of that fundraise of that uprising. They are intentionally making a decision that as conditions worsen for African and poor and working class people in the US and around the world, that they are going to ramp up militarization. They are going to ramp up police and security forces because they want to be able to violently put down any kind of uprising that comes up. And so we've seen in the way that they respond to the George Floyd uprising, but also in the way that they responded to the Palestine Solidarity Movement, that they are not planning to capitulate or concede or grant anything. They're just going to talk a game as much as they can, and then they're going to be preparing to brutally smash people down, to have them beat up by the police, to have them locked up, like facing felonies, facing terrorism charges. Like that's the way they're going. And so I think that people have to recognize You can't say Kamala Harris as an individual is a possibility of hope. You have to look at the broader picture of what the condition of imperialism and global capitalism is and what decision the ruling class is making now. Like they are choosing fascism, and it's not going to show up as an individual. It's going to show up as repression on all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, what's scary about that is that Kamala Harris went on that stage at the DNC and she essentially laid that all out bare. And it sounded completely normal in people's ears because that's how far to the right we currently are. That's like every time we play this game of pulling them left, they are like tying us with like rope to a car to the back of a truck and dragging us 50 miles down the road to the right. And then when they finally like park the car, that's our new destination. That's our new normal. And so like all these things start happening in tandem. What's that? All these things start happening in tandem where like, okay, Kamala Harris is on stage talking about how we need a strict border, essentially saying we need to build that wall. And
They
then
are.
like if she's talking about building the wall, and then you go on TikTok or Facebook and you see everybody you know complaining about Venezuelan gangs in Colorado and how they're coming over here. We need to protect ourselves. All of these things are happening like this. And these become like the norms, and they become the norms in our society. And it's like it's very terrifying.
Yeah, to your point, Salifu, I was thinking about that, like even thinking about the DNC, right? Because some people are just starstruck. And to what point are they even listening? But you know, at those conventions, you have a hype man for the crowd. Everybody cheer, clap, you know? So to the point where she starts saying the wildest shit and people are chanting, USA, USA. That's one thing in the convention. But how it reads to someone watching that on TV is completely different, right? It could be completely manufactured in the convention. And it could be obvious as shit in the convention that it's manufactured. But how it reads, because that was a whole production. And they were really honest about that being a production, because one of the takeaways that the pundits were saying on MSNBC was that they got a bunch of things that could go viral. And they were intentional about these little viral clips that could be shared online. Because the way that they went about doing this production, I don't even know if there was the intent was to even get the numbers up afterwards. Because like Musa and I noted, it has not risen. It has not shifted at all. But they are trying to create an image of Kamala Harris in the Democratic Party to the wider masses. And in that, trying to activate and agitate a group of people to start get to the streets and get to the polls, because this is the most important election of our lifetime, and this is historic, and this is about joy and bringing back joy, and we're never going back, and all like it's slogan after slogan after slogan, because she's a brand, and they are branding Kamala Harris in order to get whatever Democratic nomination gains, because also even say she loses, it's a benefit for the Democratic ticket in general, right? Because everybody just votes down ballot. So everybody's pushing this one way or the other, even if it doesn't work out for her, because it's the bigger picture, the broader pictures for the Democratic Party and the normalization of Western imperialism or U.S. imperialism, and the fact that they are trying to spread U.S. hegemony across the globe. And you're seeing that in how people are talking about these world issues, like the Venezuela, or even how people are talking about Iran. Leftists, in fact. So I think there's a level of normalization that has hit us all, because we are propagandized. It's to the point of Africans here. We know we are colonized, and we know that comes with things. So to Onye's point, there are careerists, and then there's the everyday people. Because I tell folks, like, the people that I hear talking about they about to vote for Trump are not even registered. They just talking shit on the like, you know what I'm saying? Everybody smoking, we talking the big shit. They not even registered to fucking vote. They not voting for no goddamn Trump. But they know there's a clarity around what Kamala Harris means, what she represents. And that, I think, is what scares them, that people could be that clear about the Democratic Party after year after year after year of failures and disappointments and broken promises, that people are like, wait a minute, y'all niggas don't never really do what y'all say y'all about to do. Where's the $600?
Yeah, we were supposed to be receiving monthly checks throughout the whole duration of the pandemic, if you recall. Then the second that ass got in office, they were like, JK.
And then they gaslit us. I don't know if gaslit is the appropriate word here. I feel like people just be using that word. But then they basically just kind of like reoriented it to make it seem like anybody expecting that was being
Yep.
like unrealistic
Yep.
and like out of their mind, crazy. Like, why are you even asking for that? You don't need that.
Yeah.
They reorganized the priorities of the entire society. We stopped talking about rent moratoriums. We're like
Yep.
everything. It just all went away. It just
Well, they
all
also,
went
I
away.
mean, they stopped talking about COVID. Like they remember they ran on the fact that
That's exactly
they
what.
felt as though Trump and the Republicans, were not doing enough for COVID, and that it was the Dems and Biden were going to make sure everyone's safe and all of that. And so like they actually really that was a big part of their campaign. And then they just completely abandoned that the second they got into office. And they were like, what's COVID? I've never heard of this. The CDC will no longer be putting out daily COVID counts. And I
Right.
think the two things that really stand out for me is that the comment she made, she says, I'm gonna build the most lethal military in the world. And I think that because I know how much speech writers, marketing, PR execs, communications workers craft these speeches. It's a team of them who work on these speeches that go on to these teleprompters. It's not like one person in a lab. I know that they talked about what is the best word to use here, and they intentionally chose to say lethal. That is some straight up fascist shit to me. Like that is first off, it's already the most lethal military ever to exist. And you're talking about making it worse than that. Second, she continually says in her very first campaign ad that she released, which was all about the border, right? She continually says in her speeches and in her first campaign ad, I will hire thousands of new Border Patrol agents. She keeps on saying that. I will hire thousands of new Border Patrol agents. And I'm like, she is literally telling y'all I am more to the right of Trump. Trump did not do enough to quote unquote secure our border. I will take it further than he took it. This wall might not be the best idea. Instead, let's just have thousands of new armed agents at this wall, right? And so I think that we're just at this standpoint where I think it's really hard to determine at this stage, like what's going to happen in the election, who's going to win or who's not. But I think what is very clear and objective is that the contradictions have never been this stark and this high. And I think that they have also run out of a lot of steam. They're repeating a lot of talking points, a lot of old campaigns and old slogans they're trying to bring back. People don't care as much because our attention is so divided. I've heard more people say they're not going to vote for anyone at all than maybe ever before. Like the apathy towards the election is in and of itself like huge right now, which is like, and so our role is really, and y'all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, is like, how do we get those apathetic voters to turn into organizers and show them like you do have power, you can exercise your power through community, through organizing against these motherfuckers up here at the top. Um, because the silk press ain't gonna free us, y'all. The silk press ain't gonna get us through fascism. Fascism is here, as George Jackson said. It's been here. Um, let's get free.
Should we start to move towards a closing? We've been talking for 2 hours.
Yes, let's.
All right, all right. So let's talk about the path forward, Erica.
Yeah, we are in, like I said, we got pulled in a million directions as organizers, but we are in the process of recentering. So in terms of how we see this blog being utilized is to answer Musa's question. How do we turn those apathetic, everyday, non-committed people into organizers? And I think that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do. So in terms of a path forward collectively and a path forward in terms of the blog, we're seeing them as one and the same. Because as organizers, I think when we coming back from Cuba too, it was a question that we really thought hard about, because that was a question that was really posed to us while in Cuba. Like, what is our role as independent media, as anti-imperialist independent media? And I think it is to shake shit up. Because again, this is a battle of ideas, and I think that we are armed very well over around these parts. You know, we always ready for war around here. But I do think understanding that it's a battle of ideas really needs to be understood that it's a battle, right? So we make sure that the analysis is not just clear but correct. Like to Salifu's point, like there are a lot of people who are never going to say my bad about a lot of shit that they argued us down to the ground for. I mean, even to the point of the Sahel today. Like there's a lot of people that are never going to say it my bad. But I do think one of the benefits of the blog is that our work, even if we are proven incorrect, it's there. And you can find it and you can struggle with it and you can rip it apart and take it apart and use it. And I think that's what we want to continue to do as a blog. I also am pushing for us to bring the Telegram talks back. You know, free my nigga in France, the Telegram CEO, because you know when Twitter got us the fuck up out of here, Telegram held us down. So please do join t.me/hood communist on the Telegram. We're looking to bring those bi-weekly, probably monthly, if we want to be realistic, PEs back, because I do think that was one way that we were able to engage people beyond just the blog, but have these struggles, have these conversations, and it did help funnel people into organizations or where they rightfully belong. And I think it opened up our viewership that we are not just writers necessarily, or journalists, as Margaret likes to call us, Margaret Kimberly, but we are organizers. And I think first and foremost, that's what we put at the front of the work.
Anya, do we have any announcements?
I believe Musa did, and I think Erica did as well.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to tell people, check out Groundings podcast. 2 new episodes just dropped in honor of Black August last month. One of them with Erica herself, alongside our dear comrade Tamanisha John, talking about imperialism in the Caribbean, looking at Guyana, Haiti, and Cuba. And then I did another episode with Anoa Changa about her father, Baba Iusi, not Iusi Quayana. Oof, name slipping me. Um, Political prisoner who we love dearly, Baba Masai Ehosi. And then tomorrow I have a new episode coming out with Joshua from PACA, talking about the DC crime bill and community control of police and the different organizing that they're doing in DC around the crime bill. So tap into Groundings if you want to hear the similar themes from this conversation carried out a little bit further, as well as each episode gives you some really clear call to actions on how to support different organizations.
Yeah, I was gonna also suggest that the two of you also talk about where else your work can be found and what else you're doing. I am with the collective on Activist News Network. So every Sunday, we speak with Lace Maroof. These last 2 Sundays, I got a chance to speak. So any updates, what's happening with the resistance and Gaza in general and the West Bank, you can find it over there, as well as the updates on the Sahel. I know we didn't get to that today, but you can find that report back from the comrades, Prudence Anem and Obi. Tunde moderated that on the Activist News Network. And then also on Black Liberation Media. Every Wednesday, I am to be found. Possibly, yes. As frequent as I can make it. But yeah, please do tap into our work. Also, Musa and I are members of Black Alliance for Peace, Salifu too. We are members of the Black Alliance for Peace. So you can learn more at the website, blackallianceforpeace.com, and learn how you can join or get some of the statements and updates, because a lot of our statements are also published on the blog, but a lot of our work and what drives us to write, you can find on through BAP.
And the All African People's Revolutionary Party is my political home and also a member organization of the Black Alliance for Peace. A lot of the work the APRP is doing, we've expanded really, really quickly. And so we're doing a lot of building of internal infrastructure, particularly in our chapters at home and in our newly formed US chapter. I also wanted to shout out, so the conversation that we had tonight about Kamala Harris, about the opportunism of the Democrats, about like the astroturfing, the intentional social media campaign to drive a wedge between Africans and Palestinians. We're going to be diving deeper into the blog. I believe this week, this Thursday, we're going to publish a collection of pieces digging deeper into the things that we've discussed tonight. So please check that out on Hood Communist Thursday. And then next week, we are going to publish a collective piece where we are going to drag the shit out of these people. So please tune in for that. And please read Hood Communist, read the latest articles on the blog, subscribe to us on YouTube. If you watch this for like 2 hours and you have not subscribed to the channel, why? Why? Just subscribe, hit a like on the stream, share the stream, discuss it with your comrades, get more eyes on this revolutionary African content. And of course, follow us on our Instagram at Hood Communist. And like Erica said, join our Telegram channel, t.me/Hood Communist, so you can join our lives, so you can see the articles as soon as they're published, and so you can stay up to date on whatever we're doing. Any announcements, Salifu?
Oh, guys, also support the Thomas Sankara Center in Burkina Faso. Recently, we launched another crowdfunding campaign because we're trying to build a second center in Niger. Everybody in Burkina Faso is very excited about it, as well as our comrades in Niger. It's like a very positive opportunity for sort of people-to-people political education and ideological development to be happening. This is how we spread Nkrumahism, terrorism, cabralism, with the name, with the ideals, with the ideologies, like very, very, very important. And it's so nice that we have the connection to these comrades in Burkina Faso who have committed their lives to doing this work. So please, if you come across that GoFundMe, share the link, donate to it, and make sure that people know that positive things are happening in the African world, and we have to be ready to defend them because our oppressors are not going to take this kind of stuff laying down.
All right, thank you so much, y'all, for joining us for our 5th anniversary live. Again, please like this video, subscribe to our channel so you can make sure that you are following all of our next live releases. But we just want to say thank y'all so much for your consistent support and engagement with Hood Communists. We could not have continued for 5 years and counting without the support of the people who read the blog, who share the articles, who use the articles in their day-to-day organizing work. So shout out to y'all, and we want to build the revolutionary African movement. We want to build the African liberation struggle. We want to fight for the liberation and unification of Africa, and we want to read Hood Communists. So thank y'all.